Hi everyone, Dr. Ahles here. In this short video, we're going to introduce things called macromolecules and talk a little bit about how they're made or how they're broken down. When I talk about macromolecules, these are the largest things that we use as building blocks inside our cell. Remember that we talked about this word organic. When I talk about macromolecules being organic, this means that they contain carbon. So carbon-containing compounds, considered organic, each of these macromolecules we're going to talk about in this module contain carbon. The four types of macromolecules that we see, that we'll discuss each individually, include the carbohydrates. In general, when we think about carbohydrates, these are what we might consider the short-term energy sources in our cell, meaning I can break them down quickly and get energy from them really fast. We'll discuss how there are a couple of other purposes of carbohydrates, but that's kind of the most important purpose of them. We also have another form of energy that we store inside our cells, and that's lipids. Lipids are a way for us to store energy for a long time. So if I'm wanting to hold on to something, if I have extra energy that I don't need right now, rather than storing it as a carbohydrate, I would rather store it as a lipid. It's much more efficient for storing energy. We also have proteins inside our cells. Proteins I like to think of as the functional machines. A lot of them are enzymes, so they get jobs done. Some of them also give us structure to our cells. They do a lot of different things. The final kind of macromolecule that we have are nucleic acids. Nucleic acids as in DNA or RNA. When we think about nucleic acids, these are the directions that help our cells to be alive. These can help us know what we should be doing and when we should be doing it. So all of these macromolecules come together in a cell to make it functional and to allow you to be alive. When we talk about macromolecules, we're talking about something called a polymer. And polymers are large molecules made of many small pieces. So we can see over here on the right are four macromolecules that we just talked about. Each of those macromolecules are made of smaller pieces that we see labeled here. So my polymers, the big pieces, but the big pieces that make up those polymers are called monomers. So small pieces that come together to build these large structures. The small pieces are monomers, the large pieces are polymers. Let's go through these polymers and monomers one by one. One example from the group of macromolecules called carbohydrates would be starch. Starch is something that plants use to store carbohydrates. So if you notice from my picture here, I have many of these small pieces that I see here connected to each other. Those small pieces are called monosaccharides. So the small pieces, the monomers of a carbohydrate, would be monosaccharides, one sugar. The polymer would be things like starch, or we'll talk about in another video, chitin, or other large molecules like that. When we consider lipids, the smallest piece that we can break a lipid down into are what are called fatty acids. And fatty acids come in saturated or unsaturated varieties, but fatty acids are my monomer that build the polymer that I see of lipids. There are several different types, but what we're looking at right here is a polymer called a triglyceride, 3 fatty acid tails attached to a glycerol. When we talk about proteins, my monomer of proteins are amino acids. Anytime you hear the words amino acids, you should be thinking that I'm building a protein. When I string together those amino acids, I call it a polypeptide. Or if I have enough of those amino acids together, we build a functional large protein. So my monomer of proteins are amino acids. My polymer of proteins, when I connect many amino acids together, is polypeptides. The final macromolecule that we mentioned was nucleic acid. And when we talk about nucleic acid, my monomers are nucleotides. Nucleotides are my letters A, T, G, and C. When I string those letters together, I can make something like DNA, or I can make something like RNA. So big picture, what am I hoping that you get out of these last two slides? I want you to know the names of the monomers, the small pieces, that I use to build each type of polymer, the large molecules. If you know those things, you're in good shape. Let's talk about the way that we go from the small pieces, the monomers, into the large pieces, the polymers. We use a type of chemical reaction called condensation reactions. In condensation reactions, we pull together two smaller molecules to make something large. We're condensing them down to one thing. When we do a condensation reaction, we're also always going to release some kind of small molecule. If that small molecule happens to be water, the specific kind of reaction we're talking about is called a dehydration reaction. But anytime we're forming these polymers, we're going to start by connecting two monomers to each other to make a small molecule, and then we'll continue. Notice that in this chain, I already have three that are attached to each other, and I want to add a fourth. So I remove a molecule of water across the two of these, and now I've built a bond where I have four monomers together. I'll continue this process over and over and over again until I've built my polymer as big as I want it to be. When we think about condensation reactions, when we think about building something bigger than what we had before, there are two things you need to know about it. Thing number one is that it's non-spontaneous, meaning a reaction that builds something is not going to happen on its own. It's not going to happen automatically. We need to give it an input or a stimulus to get it started. And the reason it's not going to happen automatically is because of this word right here. We would say that condensation reactions are endergonic. Endergonic is a fancy word for saying I require energy. Endergonic reactions will not happen unless we use some ATP, or unless we use energy in the form of things like heat or other molecules. So making a polymer, building something big, remember that this takes energy, and it takes energy because we're making covalent bonds, the strongest kind of bond that we can build between monomers. Suppose I don't want to build a polymer, maybe I want to break a polymer. When I break a polymer, I'm going to use a type of reaction called a hydrolysis reaction. In a hydrolysis reaction, we're now going to add water back across that bond that we made. So in a hydrolysis reaction, we start with that polymer with multiple monomers attached to each other. We add in some water across this bond, and it splits up those two the polymer into a monomer, and something will continue to break down. So hydrolysis is really what we do the entire time when we're doing the process of digestion. We're turning the macromolecules, the polymers in your food, into something that your body is able to absorb, something that's able to get inside your cells and be usable. Unlike what we saw with the condensation reactions, hydrolysis reactions are spontaneous. They'll happen automatically all on their own. That's because hydrolysis reactions are exergonic. And exergonic means that they release energy. It doesn't cost me any energy to break a bond. It costs me energy to build a bond. When we're talking about needing energy to do some reactions, this is a good time for us to mention enzymes. And think about enzymes kind of as the race car that's going to help our chemical reactions occur more quickly. So enzymes can be used to help hydrolysis reactions occur more quickly, meaning adding water to break big things into small pieces. Enzymes are great at doing that. But enzymes are also helpful when we're doing dehydration reactions. Dehydration reactions are when we pull together two monomers to build a polymer, And in this particular kind of reaction, remember that we're pulling out water to make that happen. When we think about enzymes, what they do on a technical level is they take the amount of energy that it would have cost to do a chemical reaction, and they actually lower it. They make it less hard for you to build something, or less hard for you to break something. If we do those things, it's going to allow us to do these reactions more quickly. With enzymes, we have many in your body, and the reason we have so many is because they are highly specific. So, for example, one enzyme that I use to break down carbohydrates is called sucrase. Sucrase is an enzyme that breaks down the sugar sucrose. So the name of an enzyme gives us a good idea of what it's going to work on. Here's another one. Lipase is an enzyme that breaks down lipids. Lipase and lipids. And we've talked a lot about breaking enzymes. Let's mention a building enzyme, and that's called DNA polymerase. DNA polymerase builds DNA. It builds this polymer that stores your genetic information. On that note, we're going to end our introduction to macromolecules. Next up is a video about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates like sucrose.